All right, guys, so today we are going to be talking about what we need to think about for parts 4 and 5 as we get ready to finish up our CVA. So, parts 1, 2, and 3, you've defined your standard, you've broken it apart, you've deconstructed it, you've identified the pieces that you want to make sure students know and understand. So this next piece that we need to think about, and this begins with part 4, is what is it that we want to make sure that our assessment entails. So you'll notice that on in the CBA part 4, it has these, a place for a statement, a place for what type of assessment method you're going to use, and then it has a percentage. So we're going to kind of work through all of those. So we have 4 different assessment methods that we can use. So we have the selected response, which you all are very familiar with, I'm sure. It's multiple choice, true and false, things like that. We have a written response, which is going to be a short answer, an extended answer type of response. A performance assessment means physically doing something, so a performance task. And then the last one is a personal communication. So this might be an oral exam, this might be just one-on-one communication. Personal communications happen very often in the formative assessment, because as a teacher you're constantly asking students questions. When it comes to being in a more summative place, it's sometimes more difficult because you don't have that written record. But personal communications, again, are happening all the time, especially in the formative assessment. So for parts 4 and 5, you will have to decide which assessment method makes the most sense for your topic. So that's what we're going to think about and walk through. So we've gone through the 2 pieces, right? We've had the clear purpose, we've identified what we want to assess, and then what are the targets that we're trying to do. Again, we need to make sure that if we're using a knowledge target, that we are matching it with some type of knowledge assessment. Again, if you have something where you expect kids to be able to recite things or list information that has been given in some type of more formal setting, then a knowledge target, a performance assessment doesn't make sense, because that's not what you're expecting from them. If you're expecting them to be able to recite information, then it's going to make more sense for you to pick a selected response and possibly a written response. But a performance doesn't make sense in personal communications. Again, in a formative assessment, yes. In a summative assessment, probably not. So again, these come straight from your books. This is starting in chapter 4, and that starts on page 87. And again, I have already got through all those. So guys, I'm not going to go through each of these. I have put at the top what chapter they come from. I think for the most part, you know what each of these types of assessments are. So please make sure that you go back and that you think about what would make sense for your standards. And remember, they don't all have to be the same. So we have chapter 5 is select a response. Chapter 6 is the written response. Chapter 7 is the performance assessment. And chapter 8 is personal communications. So again, you will need to decide what assessment makes the most sense for your areas. So then the next thing we need to think about is how would you score something like a portfolio or a group project. These things all fall under the umbrella still of the 4 assessment models, because it allows, within a portfolio, there's multiple things that have been collected. So within each of those individual pieces, you have parts that have been assessed in a way. So again, these all fit under one of the 4 assessments that we've mentioned. So, and I've already alluded to some of this. You will be doing an activity too where you're matching the assessment methods, but just remember, how was the information delivered to the students and what was your expectation? Then what should they be able to do? So you just want to make sure that you are not mixing 2 different methods that don't make sense, or a target and a method that doesn't make sense. This comes straight from your text, and it is a chart that just tells you, okay, if I'm doing this, what might make sense? Again, we've talked all about selected response is good for knowledge, but it's really bad for product. Or, you can go across and you can see those, and that's on page 94 of your text. So the assessment, you have been working on making sure that you have the targets deconstructed, you have identified what you want students to be able to do. Now what you're going to need to create is actually a test blueprint, and that's where those percentages come from. So in your text, if you go to page 111, they start looking at, okay, what does it mean to create a test blueprint? So you have your statement, you have the type of target, and then you're going to have to decide what your assessment method is and how much is it worth. So when you're looking at part 4 of your CBA, that's the piece that you are now moving towards, right? So you've identified the learning target, you've identified the type of target, and now you're deciding the assessment and what is it worth. So please make sure that you're being very thoughtful. For the test blueprint, I just want to give you a ballpark idea of how many questions we're thinking about for the summative assessment. I do not want you to have more than 20 questions, and 20 may sound not like, I don't know if I want to say a lot, but if you're doing something that is more about reasoning or more about performance or whatever it is, 20 is way too many. But if you're doing something that is more related to just to a knowledge target, then 20 is, it's more than enough. And we want to make sure that we see different types of assessment methods. So out of those 20 questions, please don't make them all selected response. Please don't make, don't say, hey, all 20 questions are going to be exactly the same. They're going to be matching or true and the false or true and false. If you are doing a performance assessment, you will also then have to construct a rubric that will model your expectations. So please make sure that you think about that. So if you feel that once you write your assessment, is it appropriate for you to be using a rubric? You need to create a rubric. I think in many ways, even in a written response, there may be a place for a more simplistic type of rubric, but you will have to make those choices for yourself. All right. Again, more information. For this piece, we are looking for a more summative assessment or a performance assessment. So please make sure that you're thinking about that as you do it. Formative assessments are happening all the time. So when we think about this, a summative or a performance assessment is looking at the overall understanding based on what targets we've selected. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these pieces. These are just things for you to think about. And then this, again, starts on the test blueprint piece, which is part 4. And I believe it starts on 110. So please make sure that you go and you look at that piece. So, and again, guys, this is part 4 of what you're going to be working on. So you've listed, you've deconstructed, you've written the learning targets. Now you're selecting the appropriate assessment method and you're defining the importance of each. What weight, so what percentage, and you'll see there's a little tiny percent sign at the top of that column. So 2 things that I just want you to think about, and again, I'm not going to go, you can read each of these slides, but you have to make sure that bias does not exist nor distortion in the questions that we construct. So please make sure that you're paying attention to that. And I'm sorry that my dogs are barking. All right, biases. So again, I'm not going to read all of these, but remember, a bias is going to impact a student in a negative way. So we need to make sure that we eliminate all bias from questions as we ask them. So some of the bias things that may happen are, you can see the list here. Language barriers is probably one of the most easily identified. So again, we just want to make sure that we are accurately assessing student work. Again, some of the things that you will see within a classroom. So these are more of the physical things that are happening. These barriers then come from the way in which you word your questions and making sure that all students understand what you're asking them to do. All right, I think that I'm going to call it quits for today, and you will need to just begin working on parts 4 and 5 of your CBA.